Hello and welcome to Freedom from Fear, a German New Medicine podcast. I'm your host, Ashley Newberry.
And I'm your other host, Abigail Puccioni. Please be aware that nothing discussed here on this podcast should be taken as medical advice.
Consult your trusted professionals and your own inner knowing before making any health decisions.
Hey guys, so before we dive into the episode, we just wanted to share some really exciting news about an event that we're going to be a part of this January 25th through 26th in Austin, Texas. And it's called Paradigm Shift, a GNM weekend. And this is truly going to be all about building GNM community and socializing with like-minded individuals who are all on this paradigm shift journey. And we're going to feature a lineup of expert speakers on a wide variety of different GNM topics. Ashley and I are both going to be speaking at this event. And the main focus is going to be on how to actually integrate this beautiful body of knowledge into your life. We would really love to see you guys there, and we have the website linked up in the podcast description. It's paradigmshiftweekend.com. So definitely check that out for all the details, including the full speaker lineup and information on how to register. So yeah, we hope to see you guys in Austin this January. Hey everyone, welcome back to our episode today. We are changing things up a little bit. I know that we've been really doing a lot of topical episodes, but today we're going to be bringing you some really cool resolution stories and helping bring GNM to life and really illustrate what this looks like in real life. Someone both herself and then with her children, navigating repair phases and symptoms and really living from the GNM paradigm. So we're really excited to jump into the episode today. And yeah, we're going to be sharing different SBS stories, different symptom stories. And then we're also going to be getting into a little bit of a broader topic of just how to navigate GNM with children, how to teach it to them, how to live from this paradigm and really, embody this beautiful knowledge. So we'll be jumping into, all sorts of fun discussions based on the stories that will be shared today. So, Ashley?
So we're interviewing Ali. Ali Hemaidan is a human and mother who started her own holistic skincare line, The Skin Juice, that emphasizes the neuroplasticity and changing your mind to change your skin and your reality. She is passionate about learning and embodying the GNM paradigm, and we're so excited to share some of her resolution stories with you guys. Welcome, Ali.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Yay. So let's go ahead and jump into the first story that you have to share. I know you have so many good ones to share, but let's start with the separation conflict of your daughter.
Okay, so I exclusively breastfed my daughter when she was born. And we kind of took it to when she started like baby-led weaning and trying new foods and whatever. It became more of a comfort breastfeeding, or like if she got sick or got hurt. And I guess I didn't realize how much I needed it emotionally too, especially because I don't know if I'm going to have more kids. So it was like I'm breastfeeding my first and potentially last baby as well. But we started trying to wean, and I was very back and forth on it. And it was kind of this constant push and pull between the two of us. And she probably from about a year and a half to when we finally stopped breastfeeding in I want to say it was December of this last year. She developed this on and off rash on right under her lip that would be on her right side of her mouth that would coincidentally line up with where her mouth would be pressed against the favored breast that she had, which was my left side. And when we started, trying to end the breastfeeding, it was, again, the push and pull, and it would get really angry and then kind of subside when I would give in. And then finally I was like, I'm going cold turkey, basically. So I completely stopped breastfeeding, and it was a struggle at first, and the rash got really red and juicy and hot. And then I would speak to her in her sleep and try to tell her throughout the day that we were not separate from each other, because I realized it was a separation conflict knowing GNM. And it just blew my mind. It just blows my mind all the time reading the conflicts and the healing phase, but it was just really nasty, like I said. And then we got to a point where we were done, and it started to dry up and like scale over almost, and then essentially just fell away and never came back.
Yeah, that's so cool. So, what do you think was the turning point for your daughter in getting past where she was like kind of re-triggering?
I think it was my fault. I think it was just that I just kept going back and then trying to cut it off and letting her have it again and cutting it off. And I realized that eventually the best thing to do for both of us was to just stop. And I had to get to a place where I was like, I'm not a bad mom for stopping breastfeeding. Like, it's okay that it's the end of the journey, and that it's a new opportunity for both of us to express different ways of affection. Because that was very much, she's not a cuddly baby, so that was like our cuddle time too, you know? So yeah, it was definitely difficult, but it was amazing to watch it just literally dry up and disappear, and it hasn't been back.
Wow. So yeah, I think you brought up something that I wanted to touch on too. You said, "Oh, it was my fault," but when we learn these beautiful laws of the 5 biological laws, and we learn GNM in this framework, we understand that there is no right or wrong in biology, and that symptoms are not like a sign that, oh, we did something wrong. It's giving us information. And for you as a mother, what a beautiful really legacy that you can pass down to your children of using their symptoms as tools that give you, or rather as data that gives you insight into what's going on in their psyche and how they're perceiving the world around them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that way about like naming feelings and emotions lately too, because I was literally just talking with my friend, and I was kind of talking about that everybody has like that inner saboteur, you know.
Yeah.
And she was like, why do you do that? Why do you cut yourself short? Why do you, like, you know, judge yourself basically before anyone else can? And it was like wiping a window that had fog on it on my brain, and like being able to see behind it that it had words. Like the voice, I didn't really feel it as a voice, I felt it as a feeling that was like, who do you think you are? Like, you think you're special for like trying something new or whatever? And I just think it's, now I'm excited when that happens, whereas in the past it would have like sent me down a further like, oh my god, I've realized this thing, and now I'm going to get really anxious about it or dwell on it or put myself in a victimhood consciousness about it. And now it's like an exciting experience to be like, ooh, I've peeled back another layer, and now I get to like see and accept myself and integrate it and see how it elevates me rather than bring me down.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, for sure. So getting into the next conflict, which is a bite conflict. So you shared that there was some gum bleeding. Was this you or your daughter?
Me.
This was you. Okay.
Yeah.
And when did you notice that, and what was the situation happening around this bite conflict, and like who was it about?
So I am a step parent as well. I have a 11-year-old stepson, and his dad and I got together when he was about 5 turning 6. So we've been together a while, and we were not really on good terms, me and his mom. Not for any like particular reason. I just think it can be kind of, you know, you're not friends at first during co-parenting situations. And eventually we got to a place where, especially once I had my daughter and I was at home, I was like the main caregiver, you know, so we communicated a lot about stuff with my stepson. And we had built this, it was really important to me to have a really like good co-parenting relationship with her, because I have a half sister who my mom and her mom didn't speak at all. It was very tumultuous. Like I didn't want there to be like this stark separation, and I wanted him to see like that our families can get along and work in his best interest, essentially. So we got to this point where she had offered to take pictures of me and the kids. Like we were like really cool co-parenting, you know? So I felt very proud of that relationship. And then one day, my stepson had asked if we could go to his mom's house to go swimming. And I was like, couldn't really explain to him why that was like inappropriate or whatever.
Yeah.
And I was like, probably not. And he was like, well, I already asked my Mimi, so, and she said we can come. And I was like, okay, well, I'm going to reach out to your mom and I'll tell her. I basically wrote this very long thing about like, if this is crossing boundaries, I absolutely understand and we won't go. And she gave us the go ahead. If my mom can do it, I'm glad it can happen, go. So then a couple weeks later, she was upset with my fiance about something, her ex-husband. And she kind of took it out on me. And I felt like I needed to be defended on some level. And with that came like a tirade of the opposite feelings that I thought she had for me, that like our relationship wasn't what I thought it was. And it shocked me. I know that conflict active phase initiation feeling of like, I was literally sitting there, I felt my blood run cold, hearing her just yell all these like really angry things and just ruminating all night. And then the next day, my fiance was like, well, I don't want to say I told you so, but this is why, you know, I was kind of nervous about the situation, whatever. And I was feeling bad about that, like an I told you so moment. But then we talked about it later on that evening, and he was like, I don't want to, I'm not trying to say it like I told you so. I'm trying to tell it to you like I care about you, and I could see it coming. I didn't want it to happen. And that I went to brush my teeth because I had an overnight count at work. So I had to go in at night. And I was brushing my teeth and my gum just started bleeding on my right hand side between my first tooth and my incisor. It was like pouring. And I was like, and I initially at the time thought like, oh, this is the resolution of that conflict. Turns out I was just in conflict active phase, not being able, because I couldn't say anything. She was saying all of this to him next to me. So I couldn't speak up for I literally was pulling up my phone, like, check the receipts. Like, she said it was fine, you know? And I couldn't say anything. So it was really difficult to not be able to literally snap back essentially at the situation.
Yeah. To speak your mind and defend yourself and be like, hey, wait a minute. Actually, look here at the receipt. You said she was totally fine with this. And yeah, that's hard to be stuck in that position where you feel like you can't snap back and can't defend yourself. And that's what this conflict is all about. It's about not feeling able to bite back, or that you shouldn't. And a lot of times this happens when we don't want to bite back or snap back at someone, perhaps an authority over us, or someone where we know that if we do, it could have repercussions, right?
Yep.
Like a child won't want to, maybe snap back to a parent, or like you didn't want to, or you weren't really able to. snap back at her to defend yourself. And then of course you're trying to be like a good step parent and, oh, I want to be the bigger person and do the right thing. And I often find that this conflict shows up so much for people who are trying to be a good person and trying to do the right thing and, trying to kind of trying to appease everyone. I usually find that this is where, the conflict will really land with some people. So it is interesting because we were going over this before we started recording. So just for everyone out there, this is a new mesoderm program. That's the tissue layer. And with this particular pattern of adaptation, we have cell ulceration or cell loss in the conflict active phase. And when there's enough ulceration, then you will have bleeding because any little small injury to that tissue can easily make it start bleeding because the tissue is in like a weakened state. It's like literally thinning. So it's easier to where it will, get easily irritated and start bleeding. So yeah, that's actually a conflict active symptom. So do you want to describe when it actually went away?
The next day, I didn't have any more bleeding. It was just the day that I brushed my teeth, and maybe it might have like a little bit, like how you can notice a little bit of like blood when you brush your teeth or whatever, but it was like dripping out of my mouth when I brushed my teeth that first night after talking about it. And this kind of leads into the next one, which is a subsequent I can't swallow this resolution. So like I said, I thought that was the resolution to the conflict I was having. And I was like, cool, you know what I mean? But I kept getting sad about it. Like I would sit in my room and I'd even be talking to my man and I'm like, this is like really sucks, like I thought we were cool, and I wasn't trying to do anything. I was trying to it's not comfortable for me to go over to my fiance's ex-wife's mother's house either, but
Sure.
my stepson wanted to do it and, whatever. So I just over and over again would find myself feeling really bummed out about it. And then one night, this is a couple months after, I believe. And I was sitting outside and I remember sitting there and they say like that the stone drops from your chest feeling. I've heard you guys mention it. I was sitting outside and I was like, I just have to accept that she feels this way about me and that's okay. And it doesn't have to mean anything about me. And I felt that just kind of leave my body. And that night I spiked a fever. And the next day, I believe, I woke up with just isolated to my right side, which is as a right-handed woman, that's my partner side, which my fiance's ex-wife would be considered a partner. And it was like that pressure, throat, difficulty swallowing feeling.
Yeah.
And I knew, I was like, this has got to be like, I guess I couldn't swallow it, that we didn't have this co-parenting relationship that I so much wanted and put a lot of weight in. And I remember my fiance went hunting while I was sick. So I was at home with the baby healing from this. And it was interesting because I had my first indication that I was like healing was that I had hypersensitivity like all over my skin. I was dry brushing and I was like, oh, that feels worse than normal. And then with the fever and the sore throat, I looked it up and it was I can't swallow this conflict. And it was very interesting because I think I hit that epileptoid crisis because I got a really, really high fever spiking and I started to feel very dizzy and like almost like I could hallucinate. And then I just started peeing a lot, like way more than I was drinking.
Mm-hmm.
And I eventually, like, I got better pretty quick, but it's interesting how conflicts can layer, because because we were supposed to go up north with him hunting. And then I had to stay home, and I was like, this sucks. Like, this stinks. And I ended up like sneezing a bunch and having like a nasal sort of symptom as well. And my daughter didn't get sick at all. And I feel like those are the moments where I'm like, it's so specific to you.
Mm-hmm.
And that alone has released so much fear for me with, exposure. And because you have a new baby, and I was like scared of everything, scared of toxins, scared of food, scared of people, like, and it just makes you sicker to be so afraid.
Yeah, definitely. So the I can't swallow conflict stems from the ectoderm embryonic germ layer. And so when a person is conflict active, you have cell loss. So essentially, whatever you can't swallow has more room to go through your throat. And so even though in this case for Ali, it wasn't like something physical she was trying to swallow, right? It was this conflict with your co-parenting, your stepson's mom, and that whole situation. And so what happens is then after you resolve it, then you have the cells built back up that were lost during the conflict active. So when you were just talking about sitting on your porch and feeling that stone fall from your soul. And so then that's when you have the pain and inflammation, and then the fever. And what is so interesting about fevers is that actually there's a different threshold of different temperatures for the different germ layers. So the ectoderm germ layer is you have the highest fevers with the healing phase. And so, right, even the specific temperature or fever that you're having points to either the endoderm if it's a low grade, if it's like a middle of the road fever, it's going to be either old or new mesoderm, and then a higher fever is going to be the ectoderm germ layer, which is super interesting to like just know that and not be afraid, right? And just like, hey, this is what my body needs to do to heal, and I'm actually okay, and just need to like take care of myself and rest. And that's so beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really cool how the different tissue layers do have their own. And Dr. Hammer found this through his research that, like Ashley was saying, each tissue layer, you have kind of a predictable range of temperatures. So a lot of times when I work with a client and they're giving me information and say if they do have a fever, I want to know, well, what temperature was it? Because then we can kind of narrow down, okay, what, tissue layer group is it? What category is it in? Is it ectoderm, new mesoderm, old mesoderm, endoderm? So that is kind of a fun little thing to know that maybe we'll have to do a future episode on that or something. But
I already have a song.
Okay, already have a song. Great. So now we can all memorize it with Ashley's song. Okay, so something else I wanted to bring up that Ali said that I think is really a great point to highlight is that she had that moment where she felt the stone drop from her soul, and that wasn't forced. It's not like she was sitting down like, okay, I need to figure out how to resolve this right now. I need to solve this conflict because I know that this is a conflict for me, and I need to figure out how to solve it because I'm afraid of having a healing phase that's too intense, or like, right, the fear-based thinking, like, oh, I got to get rid of this, or I got to figure this out. It was this moment of kind of realization that it just hit you, and you feel it. And I know so many people, they want that experience. They try to have it, but usually it's in the trying that it's kind of self-defeating.
Yeah, it like fights it. Absolutely.
Yeah.
it's really, even in the conflict that we'll get into, the scare-fright, I was fighting it. And
We can do that one now
Oh, okay, cool.
if you want. Yeah.
Yeah. So this was on the tail end of another, I can't swallow this, I believe. So my mom moved to Arizona. I moved away from Wisconsin. That's where I'm originally from, when I was 18. And I specifically chose it because it was so far away. And I had like some cousins here and stuff. So I knew if really like everything hit the fan, I'd have a landing pad, but I was getting away from everything. So it became very much my zone out here. And I could pick and choose how I wanted to interact with my family, right? And my mom moved out here after filing for divorce with my dad. And I was excited about it. And I also kind of prepped myself for, this is going to be different. But I don't think I prepared myself for just how, like maybe trespassing into my zone I would feel. And I ended up telling her that, like the day that she came, and I felt that. And I think that's what's so beautiful too, is you can like recognize that these things are happening as they're happening.
Mm-hmm.
And that you will save yourself a lot of discomfort and pain if you just say it to people or express how you truly feel. So I told my mom, like, I'm really glad that you're here. And I'm also struggling with the fact that you're in my zone. And I woke up the next morning with a sore throat that started to dissipate within like a day. And within that time, I took my daughter to the park, and she was climbing like a 3-rung little ladder up to a pretty high little platform at the park. And she fell and hit her head on the top rung as she was coming down. And it was a higher point than she'd ever fallen from before. Hit her head pretty hard. And head injury was something that deeply frightened me when she was really little. Anytime she fell over and bonked her head, I was like in a panic. And when she fell this time, I just sat with her and I was calm about it. And I was like, do you feel okay? Are you dizzy? Concussion checking. And I was like, it was scary, but you can do it again. And she went back up there and did it again. She was fine. And I texted my fiance a photo of the ladder, and I said, Jolie just fell from this. And then sent this long message about how I feel like 2 years ago, I would have reacted completely differently to this situation. And he responded back, yeah, I was ready for you to be in a full-blown panic. So I'm really proud of you for like, taking this gracefully and, not losing your mind about it. And the next day, so mind you, I already feel like I've solved a prior conflict, and it's like I felt better enough to walk to the park and everything with my daughter. And then the next day, I completely lost my voice, and I lost it for like almost 2 weeks. It was really like, and I'm a talker, I love to chat, so it was really hard for me to just like be quiet. And I just kept talking, and I felt that this sucks, and gave myself the sync conflict on top of it. And so I was, had all the post nasal drip situation with a no voice, and discovering that it was a scare fright that I could have on behalf of my daughter. And I think specifically that I think it was so long and intense with I guess it would be laryngitis, right?
Mm-hmm.
Specifically, was that was like resolving 2 years of freaking out about head injuries, and responding in a much more calm and resourceful way, and noting that I was doing that. was what made it such a more intense healing phase.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like, especially because how old was she when she hit her head when this happened?
She was not yet 3.
Okay. Yeah. So toddler. She's pretty
Mhm.
young.
Yeah.
And I don't have kids yet, but I have watched a lot of kids in my lifetime. And so I can't imagine being the actual parent and, having to witness that. And yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And yeah, what's so interesting about this conflict, I used to run this one a lot, especially when I was younger. I would lose my voice constantly. This is way before I knew GNM, and I look back and I'm like, oh yeah, definitely makes a lot of sense. And what's so interesting is that when this conflict gets activated, it's basically like you, and again, if you had this conflict on behalf of her, it's there's no one to call out to in that moment when you're scared, right? There's nothing you can do, right? And so I don't know if you were at the park by yourself with her or right. And so in that moment, you're kind of not helpless, but like there isn't anyone to call out to, right? So like, let's say if your fiance had been there and you were able to be like, hey, I need your help, like you might have not activated this conflict because there would have been someone else there to call out to. And so with this program, the larynx program, when you resolved it, and this is a new brain program, and so when you resolve it, similar to the can't swallow conflict, you have the inflammation and swelling, and so that is on the vocal cords, and so it makes your voice either very hoarse or where you can't talk at all. And as a fellow talker, this one is always very challenging too, because it's like, I can't express myself, I can't sing, I can't talk. So yeah, I totally understand that. And yeah, also what you said about that it had kind of been building up, right? About these multiple other kind of scare fright situations where maybe you didn't have symptoms, but those are kind of priming you to have this conflict in that moment. And so, then when you resolve it and you have the losing your voice for a few weeks, like it was probably felt maybe more intense than maybe what you experienced in that moment, but like also every healing phase is coordinated and correlated to the intensity of the conflict shock and how long your conflict active, like in that moment, right? Until the moment of resolution. So yeah, it's interesting to like think about how those previous times when it had happened, and maybe you were allowed to freak out, and maybe that's why you didn't have the conflict, right? Because you were able to like call out to someone, or there was someone else with you, or you let yourself freak out in the moment, right? Whereas this time you handled it differently and you're trying to be there and be supportive, which is beautiful. And sometimes because our primal biology, like our primal selves, the goal of our biology is not actually to be regulated and like always say the right thing and be prim and proper, all the time.
Right.
So sometimes by actually, and I'm not saying this happened in this situation, but just as a possibility, when we resist that or suppress it, then that's when we actually have the conflicts, because, oh, I'm not able to say what I need to say, right? And that seems to be a theme with the different conflicts you've expressed so far, is being able to express yourself. So yeah, all of this is just very interesting how our psyche can perceive things in the moment and how we adapt, and that someone else could have adapted to this situation, very differently. So,
Yeah.
I think there are a
because
lot of, oh, go ahead.
just that previously I would have spent days like kind of freaking out about it. So I think there is, like you're saying, it, although maybe not biological, still on some level helped me move past. Like, it was probably more helpful to me than maybe to my daughter in that moment, but on a biological level. But it was like a shift in perspective, and like not absolutely spiraling down a worst case scenario anxiety
yeah.
road. Yeah, it's all just very interesting.
I am curious, how do you feel that knowing GNM might have, I guess, changed the way that you reacted? And that, I mean, you had a conflict shock, right? But you also resolved it pretty quickly. So how do you think knowing GNM maybe played a role in that?
I think that specifically that GNM has erased a lot of fear of getting sick or having healing symptoms. I don't worry about it. And it kind of like you were saying that people really are desperate to get to this place where they're resolving. And I guess I come at it very like, I'll address it when we get there and I'll understand it. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So that's just the way that's not intentional. That's like, I'm literally just thinking about it right now, that's what I do. I don't look for resolution. I'm very retrospective in German New Medicine. It helps me understand myself. It helps me get through things as they're happening, but then I can see the whole thing when it's done. And it helps me kind of move forward with how, it primes me for even less fear next time, essentially.
Sure. And I guess from what I'm picking up on, because I know the head injury, that of course injury is an exception, and we have a whole episode on exceptions in GNM and stuff. But we know that if she, did fall and hit her head, like that can be an issue, even outside of biological adaptations.
Right.
But probably knowing the 5 biological laws and knowing GNM and having more, I guess, just this innate sense of trust in the body's self-healing capabilities, and knowing that, oh, okay, this, if you did your check, right? You're checking her for signs of a concussion. So you're still ruling out a situation in which you might need to go to the emergency room, but you're doing so in a way that, I mean, of course, because you still had a conflict shock from it, but you were downgrading, and then the way that you talk to your fiance, and then you're approaching it from a different angle, like, oh, her body's got this, and you were telling her, like, go climb back up there, like, you can do it. So I feel like even just embodying this paradigm shift, there can still be emergencies and accidents and things that of course are outside biological adaptations that can happen, but perhaps the angle that we approach it is a little different, because we are coming from a place of like, oh, 9 times out of 10, like, my body's probably got this.
Oh, absolutely. And it helps so much when the kids aren't feeling a certain way. I even had, so this one I don't really know, and I didn't list it as one of the conflicts that we would talk about. But my stepson had an isolated little patch, a rash on like one of his butt cheeks, basically. And for 2 weeks in a row, he would, because we're week on, week off, the parenting schedule. So he comes to us on a Friday, goes back on a Friday, and he would spend the night Friday night, and then wake up in the morning and have this rash. And we, just kind of put some tallow on it and just whatever. And he wouldn't mention it again. And then, but when it happened again, I was like, do you ever feel, because it's on the outside of his body, right? Like the back. I was like, do you ever feel like, get off my butt? Like, leave me alone kind of feeling? Like with anybody, like with me, your dad, your sister. And he's like, yeah, with Jolie, that's my daughter, and my mom. And I was like, well, maybe if you could have a conversation with her about why you feel like that. And I mean, obviously, I'll do my best to feel Jolie because she's 3. And I'll keep that in mind, you know, for you, and try and make sure that you have your physical space from her when you need it. Then we can move forward. And he hasn't complained about it since. So I don't know if he had a conversation with her or not, but sometimes even just having these conversations with my kids helps them understand, or even just like turns on a little light maybe for them in a way that helps them not be afraid of what's happening to them. But also just kind of understanding maybe where they're more likely to have conflicts or issues just on a personal level with people, and help them advocate for themselves better, for sure.
I'm sure Ashley can attest to this too, but I think that children often don't have all of the how do I want to say this? The, the logic and reasoning and the conscious, like mental chatter. Like, I think that they're able to much more easily drop in and just know what the conflict's about. Like, I don't think that they have to go searching, like, oh, I'm going to do a meditation and get into my subconscious mind and like to find what the conflict's about. Like, they really,
They
I
just
feel
know.
like they just know.
Yeah. Even just yesterday, like I always watch out for the sneezes because I think it's so funny. Like it's always, it's like one of the most immediate ones. So I had a bag full of softballs, and that was holding softballs. It's for softballs. And my daughter took all the balls out and was putting like her toys in it or something. And I was like, you can't use that for your toys. I have to use it for the balls or they're just going to be lost. I'm like, you can use your own bag. And she found her little bag from the dentist. She was like, oh, okay, I have it in there. And she sneezed like 3 times after putting her stuff in her own little bag. Like after, like, I'm sure she was like, man, that sucks, you know?
Yeah.
And I see that happen frequently with my kids after just like little moments of like, I know they're probably feeling like, oh man, but it's just, it's cool to watch. You can almost call it.
So going back to the one, because I don't think I touched on this, the scare-fright conflict, the adaptation that you had in the larynx. Just for our listeners, I wanted to go over the tissue layer. It's an ectoderm program. And of course, the pattern of adaptation with this is that we have cell loss or cell ulceration in the conflict active. And then we have cell replenishment in the healing phase. And of course, in the healing phase, that's when you would have more difficulty swallowing, perhaps some coughing, the hoarse voice. Of course, with inflammation, this is what we would call laryngitis. So that's kind of how the pattern of adaptation for this program. And actually, the biological purpose of the cell loss that occurs in the conflict active phase is to widen the larynx to allow for more air intake in order to be better able to cope with the scary thing. So it's actually trying to widen the larynx so that you can get more air in so that you can better deal with the scary situation. So that's always something I like to bring up too is, what's the purpose of this, which is the really beautiful thing about GNM, as we know. And of course, that's the laryngeal mucosa program. That's the organ level that's being affected.
So cool.
So,
yeah, Ashley, into the next one.
Gonna give each other all these bite conflicts. Just kidding. So going back to the gum polyp, I wanted you to share more of that story and what was happening, and then I'll describe a bit more of the actual program and what's happening on the organ level.
For sure. So we were talking before we started recording about how I had given a girl who I was very unnecessarily rude and mean to about 4 years ago. An apology when I noticed that she had friended me, maybe mistakenly, on Facebook. And I was like, I'm just gonna tell her that, like, I'm sorry I was so rude, and that you didn't deserve it. And I kind of went into how I'm like, I was an incredibly angry person and didn't treat really anybody, including myself, very kindly. So it kind of felt like a confession and an apology. And the next day or two, I had developed what I would call a little bubble on the left side of my mouth, on my upper gum line behind my incisor. And it just appeared and popped and bled and then disappeared and never came back. And it was really cool because I always look up what's going on when something happens. And when I read that it was like you can't spit something out, like maybe an apology or a confession, I was like, wow, it just blew my mind.
And so when did that gum polyp show up for you? Like, how long after the apology did it show up?
I would say a day.
Yeah.
It was the next day, and it came out of literally nowhere. It's not like I noticed the bubble growing or something. It just was there and popped, and it was like bloody, and then it was gone. And yeah, I didn't notice anything happening at all until it was there and released itself.
Yeah. Yeah, this one is so interesting because this is a morsel conflict. And so it's the endoderm germ layer. Say that 5 times fast. And so you have cell growth in the conflict active. And then once you resolve it, you have the cellular breakdown of the cells you no longer need anymore. And so with the old brain or the brainstem conflicts, handedness doesn't matter. So left and right is actually about ingoing versus outgoing morsels. So for Ali, in this case, it was the left side. And so that's about outgoing morsels. So something you're wanting to eliminate, right? So something you want to spit out, whether it's food or, right, you need to say something. Again, depends on the specific circumstance. And then the right side would actually be about trying to get a morsel, which is not for this example, but someone else could have something else that they're trying to catch or grab a morsel. And so that would affect a person on the right side. And so that's where, because this is an old brain program, being right or left-handed doesn't matter in this case. So every single person that has this conflict on the right would be about ingoing, and then same on the left would be outgoing. So just wanted to say that because that can be quite confusing. Because you're like, oh, well, if I'm right-handed, then the left side is mother-child, and like it just doesn't apply for the old brain stuff. And so the purpose of this conflict is to increase the saliva and increase the cells in the mouth to better expel the morsel that you either don't want, or to absorb the morsel that you're looking for, or trying to catch or grab. And so, yeah, and it's so interesting that, right, a day after you had this apology, that's when you noticed the gum polyp. And that's usually the case. Like, once again, you because there's always a moment of conflict shock, and then there's a moment of resolution. And so after that moment of resolution, it's usually 12 to 48 hours to then see possible healing symptoms. And so yeah, it's just so beautiful that knowing this information, that you were able to take that step and just listen to your intuition, to your gut. And then that's when the symptom came. So yeah, just super interesting to be able to put those pieces together. Yeah, go ahead.
And I also want to note how when, like, for the topic of resolution, there was an action that she took. Like, she made the apology. So I think a lot of people want to sit around and, oh, I want to perceptually resolve this. I'm just going to chill out about it, or I need to find a way to laugh about it. And that's all fine and good. But what action steps might you need to take to actually practically resolve that? Or in this case, she was actually spitting out the morsel that she had been, feeling kind of compelled to spit out. Like, I need to issue this apology. Right. And that's what resolved it in her psyche. And so in that sense, that was a very, I would say, practical resolution. And so for people listening, ask yourself, what steps, even uncomfortable steps, might I need to take in my life to actually move towards resolution? This isn't about, like, I'm just going to sit around and meditate for an hour every day, which can be a very beautiful practice, but doing that in and of itself is not necessarily going to resolve the conflicts in your life. Perhaps that's enough for a perceptual shift to perceptually resolve something, but that's not going to issue that apology that in your psyche is like, you need to get this off your chest. You need to issue this apology, right? So I think that that's also an important thing to note. And also, people that I work with, the ones that have the fastest resolutions are the ones that do something very tangible. They take a practical step towards doing that. They share something with someone that has been on their heart for a long time that they've never opened up and told anyone else about. They, maybe issued an apology, something that was long overdue, something that they'd been carrying that shame around with them for a really long time. So I'm not saying it's impossible to resolve without a practical, tangible action step, but that's often one of the best ways to get there. So yeah, I really like that story. And I also want to note that all the stories that Ali's been sharing so far, these are all what I would call one-time programs in the sense that they're not hanging healings, right? These are really good examples of just cut and dry. Okay, there was the conflict. She was in conflict active and she resolved it and then had the healing symptoms. Or in the case of the can't bite back, the gum bleeding would have been a symptom of conflict activity. But these are really good cut and dry illustrations, if you will, of the law of two phases. So I also wanted to point that out. Although the first one with her daughter's separation conflict, the rash that she had under her lip, that was a hanging healing. But all the others are more of what I would call like one time.
I also think that when you were talking about the practical resolution and the action step that's required a lot of times to get there, I want to say that it's helpful to look at that the same as how we were talking about, like, dying for that resolution. Is like, I don't know, honestly, if I would have made that apology had she not friended me on Facebook. And sometimes it's like that sort of stuff is like divine timing to me. It's like sometimes things will come to your doorstep and, like you said, go with your gut and like my body knew I needed to do that. And it was given the opportunity to do it. I didn't like search it out, and not that there aren't obviously, I think, opportunities that you can create for yourself also, but that's just, I think that some things you just got to let certain things just kind of happen also and just follow your intuition on them.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, do we want to get into the next one? The KCT.
Well, and so this one is a little like, I can't be too sure if that's what was happening, but I was speculating a lot because I went to Ashley's KCT
Connect the dots?
circle. Yes. And I actually had to leave early because it was my birthday and I didn't
Oh,
realize.
I remember that now. Yeah.
I didn't realize we were going out to dinner and it was like a whole thing, but it just left me really thinking about, especially very first time mom, newly postpartum, how in our very unbiological society and increasingly, especially through, I would say, COVID, very isolating vibe as people connecting with each other, and being out here. I think very specifically, I don't have any of my family out here. My fiance has a brother, and his parents are much older, so I was very much on my own when I had my daughter. And obviously my fiance is supportive and all of the things, but he worked, and he also admittedly was really like, I don't know what's up with little tiny babies. Like, and I think from a biological perspective, that's like probably more common than people would even admit, that it's like, it's supposed to be the mother and their child with those first, especially few months of life. It's like, really, what can the dad do other than support and provide? And I think that historically you would have other women around you that would help sort of lighten the load or not make you feel alone. And really speaking to like the fish out of water feeling, like it being your first time and just being like, oh my God, I brought life into the world and now I gotta like
Keep it
take
alive.
care of it and like not mess it up and whatever. There's just like a lot of like, you literally feel like a fish flopping around out of water. And I think it's increasingly so when you don't have a community really of people. And I remember everybody telling me, oh, you'll lose the weight, because I gained 50 pounds, 40 to 50 pounds when I got pregnant, like throughout my entire pregnancy. And I lost about 20 or 30 of it like pretty immediately postpartum. But then it would just kind of hang around. And I felt like I was working out. I was drinking all the water. I like stopped drinking oat milk. You know what I mean? I was like trying all the stuff. I felt like I was active, and there was really no reason that I shouldn't be able to get rid of that last 10 pounds. And everybody says, oh, well, when you stop breastfeeding. And I felt like even though I hadn't stopped breastfeeding, I had started losing it when I started making friends and having other moms around. And frankly, even though my family was far away, rekindling relationships with my family members, and just feeling like you have that support. And even I would say my mom moving here, even though she's still an hour and a half away, she's still able to come help out every once in a while or whatever. And I've lost like 5-ish pounds since she's been here, and I haven't really changed much. If anything, I've actually worked out less. So I wonder, I can't be certain that I was running a KCT program, but everything that I learned from your Connect the Dots and your recent episode that was released kind of just had me thinking very retrospectively on the postpartum experience and how many people, attribute it to baby weight or you haven't finished breastfeeding or whatever. And it's really like, we don't have community like we used to.
Yeah. And also, do you notice, or did you notice that it was more of a like puffy feeling, swollen, yeah, like a water retention?
Yeah, I could even see it in my face. Yeah. And it's interesting because sometimes even still, I'll get that when I go on my walks by myself in the morning. I've just been thinking about that recently, where I can feel it like in my fingers. And I don't know if maybe that's just because I'm not in the safest of neighborhoods and like walking alone. And I don't know, maybe there's something to that. But yeah, definitely when I was really experiencing that, like, this won't budge kind of feeling, it was like I felt puffy.
Mm-hmm.
And actually looking back at photos of me as a teenager, which teenagers were really rough for me, I was very puffy and inflamed. Like I wasn't overweight necessarily either. I just looked inflamed and like I was holding a lot of water and inflammation. I think there's probably multiple things that were contributing to that, but
I mean,
Yeah,
KCT is very common.
Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
that's kind of what I was hearing from in the
I
podcast.
mean, I don't think I've had a client that didn't have it, actually. Yeah.
Yeah.
One or the other. I mean, when you're just out walking around, and you can see people having that, right, that water weight or that puffiness. And the refugee flavor with holding onto the urea and the creatinine is less noticeable because a person with that conflict can be very thin and wouldn't necessarily, because they're not holding onto water, they're holding into the protein building blocks. But yeah, the KCT is just so fascinating. I feel like we could do a whole another episode on it, just because it's so common. And I find for myself that as I resolve more of this, that not only am I peeing out more of that water that I don't need anymore, but I have been finding that then my outer world is reflecting that, right? That because I'm no longer feeling abandoned or abandoning myself, that now I'm actually being invited to more things and having more community and more opportunities, because I'm not putting this signal out that's saying like, abandon me, right?
Mm-hmm.
Unconsciously. And so, yeah.
The brain loves a pattern. Mm-hmm. And loves to confirm a story. So that's like, literally, that's the signal that you're putting out, is like, help my brain affirm this story. I actually do, I can't take credit for it, but they're called ask-firmations, not affirmations. But when you're in that parasympathetic, like just waking up or just about to fall asleep, I'll ask myself questions like, why am I so beautiful? Why am I so safe in my body? Why am I so organized? Like literally just anything that I'm trying to like rewire the stories that I have about myself. I try to ask myself in that, twilight kind of zone, so I can wake up with it or go to sleep with it. And it is wildly helpful, actually, to kind of just any opportunity that you can to like consciously remodel your thoughts is incredibly helpful.
Yeah, I love that. Also, for those that would like to go back to our previous episodes on the KCT program, if you want to hear our deep dive into that, that's episode 17. And then we also did a whole separate episode on other reasons beyond the KCT that you might be dealing with difficulty losing weight. I know that those episodes came up in our conversation, so I just wanted to throw that out there. But yeah, moving past the SBS stories, the symptom stories, I know that we had a few different topics that we were going to talk about too, and I know that we're kind of running out of time. But first of all, what, in your opinion, is part of what sets us up to experience conflicts the way that we do? Like, what primes our perception to experience, say, a conflict event as one specific type of conflict versus another, as, separation versus indigestible morsel, for example?
I think that it all comes down to conditioning. just like I love human design, and knowing my human design energy type, for those that are familiar with human design, because that's like a whole thing I could get into, that it kind of gave me a permission slip to be myself and kind of follow the way that I knew I already was. Like, frankly, I wouldn't be doing this podcast if I didn't know my human design. Because it just gave me this trust in myself to just kind of follow what I always kind of knew was there, and actually was told was like a negative thing about me that is actually a strength. And I think that we come into this world the way we're supposed to be, and we get conditioned out of it. And I think depending on things like your energy type, or even if you're not into human design, just the way you came into the world and the way the world came down on you for those things, can lead you to have a predisposition to different conflicts. Like, I'm a manifesting generator is my energy type.
Me too.
And oh yeah, so much fun. But I specifically have a channel that's connected from my gut to my throat. And I, throughout my life, have been very, as you've, heard, I'm very predisposed to like sore throats and strep. And like, I can remember this is way before I knew GNM, but I remember having a boyfriend that I knew was going out and like cheating on me, and I got strep. And frequently I can remember situations where something happened and I got strep. And it's like, I wonder the connection between like my gut knowing that the situation was wrong for me or whatever, and my throat, and not speaking out about it or standing up for myself or whatever, played a role in what sort of flavor or conflict that I would be predisposed to. And like, obviously you're familiar with human design. My sister's a reflector, which is pretty rare. And all of their centers are open. And reading about human design, they spoke about how reflectors are way more likely to have autoimmune diseases or get sick more often because they're open energetically. And my sister does experience a lot of those things. Like, she's been diagnosed with lupus, among other things. And we talk a lot about human design and kind of like because she's a reflector, taking time to like empty out and separate very clearly what emotion she's having versus what maybe someone else is having and she's reflecting. So I just think that it's very interesting to, and it just kind of helps, like, I don't know, I like all of the different things coming together to just help me further understand myself, and it helps parent my kids. Like, knowing their energy type helps me respect their energy levels and how they might go about things. Or like, my son, for instance, is a projector, and things work out for him better when he's invited, and they don't work out. Like, I can call it almost every time. He'll be like, can I go ask if I can come over to somebody's house? And it's not like, it doesn't have to be a literal invitation, but even in those scenarios, he's like, he comes back and he feels bitter because he wasn't invited and they were like, no, and even just distinct conflicts that come from situations like that. I just think all of these things can really play off of each other or into each other and can be really helpful.
Yeah. I think that this is one of the gaps, I would say, in German New Medicine, is that we don't have a good answer for why someone experiences when they have frequent conflict events that happen in your life, and you always kind of interpret that as a can't swallow conflict, right? Like what primes you to experience that conflict in that way? And I know that, of course, human design, if people learn about that, that can be a way that they learn more about what maybe sets them up to see the world in a certain way and interact with the world in a certain way, but also just the family that you were born into, the culture in which you were raised, the school and the friends and everything about your environment that has shaped you into being who you are and has shaped your perception to be a certain way. And everyone has a different, I like to say a meta conflict, like their go-to kind of conflict. And I always describe this as like being on, let's say, a program that you never fully close out the tab on your computer. And it's just always kind of like running in the background. And it's really easy to get it going because you just like, it's right there, you never, it's just kind of minimized, but you can easily pull it right back up. And so I think that from what you're saying about just and also all the beautiful synchronicities between the body of knowledge that is German New Medicine and so many other modalities or ways of understanding ourselves, whether that's, I mean, I won't even get into other things just because it's not the focus of this podcast, but there are so many different really cool synchronicities in which you will find that the body of knowledge that is German New Medicine and seeing the world through that lens can actually pair with a lot of other things quite nicely. It's just the way that you're relating to things is different.
Yeah.
And so I love that you brought that up and that's been, or that learning about human design has been supportive to you for understanding how you interact with the world and what maybe some of your tendencies are, and that one of your go-to types of conflicts is can't swallow. And, doing that deeper inner work. And I think it probably helps you get to a deeper level of awareness and peel back that proverbial, the layers of the onion. And also, yeah, understanding with the way, I mean, I don't know much about human design, but with the way that certain people, like you mentioned, your sister, are open to or more open to reflecting the energy of others or whatever, would explain why perhaps some people tend to be really easily affected by people around them who are conflicted, right? That are more susceptible to other people being in certain energetic states. And actually, Ashley and I have an upcoming guest on the podcast who we're really excited to have on. That we're going to be doing a whole topic on contagion, and we're going to be talking about contagion, of course, from a strictly GNM perspective, but then branching just a little outside of it and getting into this seeming phenomena of contagion. And we like to call it either energetic contagion or resonant contagion, but it does make a lot of sense when you start to think about okay, maybe this person or maybe the four people in the family that got sick, maybe they all experienced the same conflict event and all had unique interpretations of that, or maybe they didn't. Maybe it's this experiencing a symptom sympathetically, right?
Yeah.
Or that we are picking up on their energy of that carrying that conflict load. And so anyway, I don't want to spoil our future episode on contagion, but yeah.
No, but
yeah, go ahead.
No, I absolutely agree. I think that especially just even knowing just your authority in human design and your energy type can bring so much awareness to how you might be more open to other people's energies or whatever. Like you talk about that, it's more of a energetic contagion in that way.
Yeah. So interesting. And I think similar to constellations and understanding that, it's like it can help you understand yourself and how to better support yourself through whatever it is you're going through and how to interact with people. And then also, I made my family all fill out the human design profiles or whatever, because I was like, oh, I need to understand everyone else's like
Oh yeah,
energy types. And it was actually helpful for
it
me.
is.
And super funny because they made fun of me for it. But
Yeah, I have a huge list I can scroll through of like anyone I even come across that I'm like, oh, I'm gonna do your human design chart. It's like
yeah.
all in my app. But yeah.
So we had one last question before we wrap up. So how do you feel that German New Medicine has shifted how you approach healing with your kids?
So when I first had Jolie, I was terrified of anytime she would get sick, or if I was sick or anyone was sick around her, I'd be like, oh my God, she's going to get sick. And frequently she would get sick like anybody else. And I would end up frequently with a cough, like a very mild cough after the fact, which can speak to the fear, most likely, of her being sick and something happening to her. But since knowing German New Medicine, I do not experience the same level of fear. I've never really been a germaphobe, but like I said, having a kid kind of sent me down a spiral of anxiety. And then I feel like now I'm, you know, rebalancing that, where I used to really just not care about germs or anything like that. I never really was like a hypochondriac. And now I feel like, kind of how I was mentioning before, my kids don't seem afraid when they get, quote unquote sick or experience healing symptoms. My daughter even talks about how, oh, when you have fever, you're just healing. And it's
Aw.
like, yeah, we talk about it all the time. I even told her today, you know how I always tell you, when you don't feel so good, your body just knows what it's doing and it's miraculously made and it's so smart. And she's like, yeah. And I try really hard to just, like I said, I'm a talker, so I just always talk about it. Like anytime anyone's not feeling good, I don't say we're sick. I'm like, we're healing.
Yep.
We're not, you don't feel well, but your body's really smart and it's doing exactly what it's supposed to do. And if we have to support it with like she calls it healing tallow, or whatever, we have like this healing stuff that's just like helpful. Like I think the common misconception is that like if you talk about this with your average person and they're like, so you're never gonna take your kid in if they get like really sick and need help. And I'm like, no, if I feel like my child's body is needing more support than we can offer at home, or just get through what we're getting through, then like there are ways in which Western medicine is very helpful, especially for acute things like broken bones and stuff like that. But for the most part, I'm like, we just tough it out and understand ourselves better on the other side.
Yeah.
Definitely. I love that perspective. I think that that's very refreshing to see, because even in the German New Medicine, let's say, world, or certainly in the holistic world, there can be a lot of judgment and different meanings beliefs associated with engaging with the medical system. And again, I know that Ashley and I have said this multiple times, but we are not anti-medical intervention. And as you said, sometimes it is needed. I mean, sometimes there are healing phases. I would say the majority of time this is not the case, especially with children, but there are some healing phases that we will need support to either save their life or to, of course, you don't want them to suffer unnecessarily. So
Yeah.
I think that that's, a really beautiful point to bring up, that you're potentially engaging with the medical system in a way that is based in your own intuition as a mother, engaging, okay, what is actually necessary and what is fear-based? What is just me kind of being subjected to the fear mongering of the medical world or friends or family that's like, oh, if you don't do that, that could turn into that, and that could be really bad, and that could, lead to this.
Yeah.
And yeah. So I think that's a really good point.
Yeah, and that's something that I think it was Natasha's mother actually speaking on a podcast that I had listened to.
Yes.
Yes. And she was talking about running a breast program, and she was like, just sit on the couch and watch Netflix and don't tell people about it. Like, and just relax. And I feel like it's not to isolate yourself, but it's to not, speaking on that energetic contagion, even like if you keep it to yourself and within your family, you're less likely to be afraid by, well, especially if you know that you're probably likely to take what people are saying and be afraid of it. Then you can really hone in on your own intuition. Like there are times where I'm going to give my kid Motrin because she can't sleep. And I would rather that she sleep during this fever, and she's, her body is doing exactly what it needs to do, but like I'll put a little bit in her juice so she can sleep, and I do think that there's just in general nowadays with social media and people needing to brand themselves and all of this stuff, that there's really dogmatic approaches to everything. Like it's rough. So I'm glad that I can be someone that definitely tries to adhere to not doing that and just following my gut and integrating all of the things that the world has to offer.
Yeah. I love that.
Jinx.
You owe me a Coke.
Yeah, buy me a Coke. Which actually that sounds disgusting to me.
Yeah, I don't like Coke
either.
either.
But
I was like, that kind of sounds good.
We're all like, no.
Well, Ali, thank you so much for coming on today. This has just been a really great conversation. I think a lot of, especially mothers out there, will really appreciate this episode. Just love your honesty and the realness that you bring to GNM, and just how sharing how you're living your life from this paradigm. I think it's really, really cool. So thank you. And is there anything, one last piece of advice that you want to tell our audience?
I think that if I could offer anything, that's something that's helped me, is that when you're confronted with a thing, I've been really into Kabbalah lately, and there's a phrase that's used that's pause, what a pleasure. Like when something sucks or something doesn't go your way, just pause, what a pleasure, because everything's here for you to learn from it or elevate or move past. And just approaching things that aren't ideal with some level of excitement and curiosity is a game changer for sure.
Yeah.
I love that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Ali, and thank you for listening to everyone that's listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much for having me, you guys.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
We hope you enjoyed today's conversation. We appreciate you being here.
If you would like some additional support in navigating your health symptoms, we both provide coaching services from a German New Medicine perspective.
Our Instagram handles and personal websites are linked in the podcast description.